Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to this latest edition, this very special Memorial Holiday Weekend edition of the Real Deal Podcast. I'm your host, the Real Gerald Quinn, taking you for the next half hour as we discuss the world of sports and pop culture. As always, the call number is 347-215-6180. You can follow me on Twitter at William Gerald, or go to my website, go to my Instagram account at Real Gerald Quinn, itunes.apple.com, Real Deal Podcast, as we discuss the world of sports on this 27th of May, 2018, the day before Memorial Day Monday. Hope everybody out there is enjoying their holiday weekend and really the first official start of the summer, unofficial start of summer. We have a jam-packed weekend. There's already been of NBA basketball. We're going to get 2 Game 7s beginning tonight, of course, at the TD Bank Garden with the Boston Celtics hosting the Cleveland Cavaliers. And, of course, you will get Golden State, Houston tomorrow night and back in Houston. We're going to begin with Boston, Cleveland. Cleveland, and both these series, if you really think about it, have come down to a war of attrition. I mean, you got guys banged up left and right. You're going to have no Kevin Love, no Andre Iguodala, more than likely no Chris Paul, even though that hasn't been ruled official yet, but more than likely Chris Paul will not play in Game 7 tomorrow night when Houston takes on Golden State. So you got a number of guys that are banged up. These teams have been playing every other day for the last week. So it's really come down to a war of attrition. And you look at the Boston game on Friday, even though Boston lost that game, the big piece that I took out of that, obviously, besides just the brilliance again of one LeBron James, who did everything, except sweep the floors in that particular game with the 46 points, 11 rebounds and 9 assists. Boston may have lost the game, but it's one of those losing the battle maybe allows you to win the war type deals for the Boston Celtics, because in that game they forced LeBron to play 46 minutes. They forced him to be heroic in that fourth quarter. They forced him to expend so much energy in that particular game. You saw last night what happens when a lot of these games, when a team has a Game 7 at their disposal in their back pocket. Houston comes out, like a house on fire, was not able to sustain that level of play, that intensity, that everything that they had to do, that they did in the first quarter in terms of shooting the ball. Golden State wears them down, and next thing you know, you're looking at 115-86. Boston, on the other hand, forced Cleveland to play 4 quarters. Now, of course, you want to wrap the series up if you're Boston up 3-2. You don't want to have to, put a Game 7, even though it's in your home gym, against LeBron James. You don't want to, you don't want to risk that, tempt that fate. But if you're not going to win the game, the next best thing to do, and which they did, is to make LeBron expend as much energy as possible. Make those guys play. He played 46 minutes, and again, look at the injuries in this. Look at the injuries between these 4 teams. This has become, like I said, a war of attrition with these games. Remember, these games have been physical. These games have been. You see coaches, whether it's D'Antoni or Brad Stevens going now, specifically to 7-man rotations. Brad Stevens has not played, ever since I would say games 5, 6, 4, 5, and 6. He's played no more than 7 men. And D'Antoni's been playing 7 guys the entire series. Now, the last game last night, he played 9 to 10 in a blowout. And you saw Ryan Anderson, you saw Joe Johnson in garbage time in garbage time late in the fourth quarter. So I give Boston a lot of credit from that standpoint in that Game 6. It was not talked about enough in terms of making Cleveland play the 4 quarters, and I think that might could be the difference in tonight's game 7. Now again, Cleveland is going to have Kevin Love out of the game. That is, that is not as big as loss as you may think it is, considering that Kevin Love, struggles defensively. But again, it's taking another shot maker off the floor. The floor shrinks a little bit for LeBron James's, driving lanes. One less 3 point shooter you have to worry about. If I'm Boston, I'm not. Listen, if Jeff Green beats me with 3 point shots, I'll just tip my hat and call it a summer, call it a season. So you're not concerned about Jeff Green making 3 point shots. I'm not concerned about Larry Nance stretching the floor. But for one game, Cleveland defensively should be a better team. Will be better without Kevin Love versus with Kevin Love. But of course, what they will not be able to make up for the 15. These averaging about 15 or 11. Those types of numbers they can't. They will not be able to make up somewhat for the number. Not so much for the numbers, but for his ability to stretch the floor and open driving lanes for LeBron. So to me, if Cleveland's going to have to get something out of two other guys, out of a combination of two other guys. LeBron's going to have anywhere from 35 to 40 points. The question is, I figure that they're probably going to need anywhere from 95 to 100 to win. Where are you getting the other 50 to 55 points from? Rodney Hood, forget about it. Calderon hasn't played in the series. You're talking about, again, the combination, talking about a Kyle Korver. You're talking about J.R. Smith, possibly. We've seen J.R. Smith in Game 7s before make some big 3 point shots. He's been awful in this series. George Hill's been up and down, though. He's played 2 out of the last 3 games. He's been solid, I would say. So you're going to need a combination of 2 other guys for Cleveland to come out on top. Remember, LeBron James, we saw LeBron James have a 42-point triple-double game in Boston, and they still lost by 13. I don't think the Boston young players are gonna flinch under the pressure or melt under the pressure of a Game 7. There'll be some tense moments, but I just don't think that this team's gonna. I just don't think their mindset is like that. I just don't think they're cut from that cloth to fold up all of a sudden at home in a Game 7. If they were on the road in Cleveland, yes. At home, I don't see them folding up. So this is a game that Cleveland is going to have to win rather than counting on Boston to melt under the pressure, because I don't see it happening from that standpoint in terms of their younger players. Boston needs to get something out of Al Horford. Al Horford has been the guy who, if he plays well, Boston normally wins. If he doesn't play well, then Boston looks bad. Horford did not play well in Game 6. As we all know, was basically a non-factor in Game 6 as you had the likes of Rozier, Jaylen Brown, were leading Boston. They have to get something out of Al Horford in this spot. You have to get a 15, 10, 4 or 5 assist game, couple of blocks. Defensively, him being all over the place. If Boston is going to come out on top in this Game 7. Vegas has Boston favored by 2, which is basically a pick 'em at home in the Game 7, and Golden State a heavy favorite on the road at 5.5, which is a big favorite considering that they are on the road. So again, to me, this NBA season has come down with these 2 games to a war of attrition between these 4 teams, a bunch of injuries. No Kevin Love, no Andre Iguodala, probably no Chris Paul. We'll see what happens. When we come back, we'll talk more about Houston, Golden State. That's coming up on much more in this next edition of the Real Deal Podcast. We'll be right back. 347-215-6180 on this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast. We are, of course, also broadcasting live on YouTube. So this podcast will be available anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes after the program has concluded, which should be around roughly around 4:30 or so. When the podcast is concluded, as always, you can find our replays also on Blog Talk Radio at www.blogtalkradio.com/Surreal Quinn. So I'll put those online, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter as well once the program has concluded. Getting back to the Houston Golden State series, Game 7 tonight. Boston, Cleveland. LeBron's 5-2 in Game 7s. We know the numbers have been off the charts in his game in Game 7s. 34 and a half point, about 35 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists, shooting about 49%. A couple of those performances have come on the road at Golden State, at Boston in a loss in 2008, against Boston in a win in 2012, San Antonio 2013, 37-12. So he's had some monster Game 7s, but he's going to need some help against this Boston team that's fought tooth and nail throughout the course of the series, throughout the course of these playoffs, has been as resilient as a team can be. He's going to need some help in this game. Like he will not single-handedly be able to beat these Boston Celtics. I thought in Game 6, again, nobody wants to talk about the George Hill performance. Those 20 points were big. And George, it wasn't just George Hill. You talk about Jeff Green, who you never know. Jeff Green is one of the most strangest players in NBA history, as far as I'm concerned, as far as you just don't know from game to game, quarter to quarter, what you're going to get out of Jeff Green. Jeff Green, 1 minute can look like an all-star. The next minute can look like a guy who doesn't even belong, looks like he doesn't even belong in the league. So they're going to need a solid game out of Jeff Green, make a couple three-pointers, do some stuff in terms of his playmaking. He does have the ability to put the ball on the floor and create offense for others. Jeff Green has, again, one of the most perplexing players in the league. He has talent. The guy, he can play, but he just floats in and out of games way too much. That's why he's been on a number of teams over the course of his career, so they're going to need something out of him. I can't expect anything out of Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance Jr., those guys. I really can't expect anything out of those guys. You're talking about Cleveland's going to win this. They're going to win this with their veteran players. Tristan Thompson, J.R. Smith, Kyle Korver. Those guys are going to have to come out and give you something. I cannot count on these new players. Hood probably won't even play. So I'm talking about I'm talking about Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance Jr. You cannot count on those guys to do anything in a Game 7, particularly on the road against this Boston team. As far as Houston Golden State, what happened last night I totally expected it. Expected Golden State to just run through Houston. I didn't expect it to be that hard in the first, considering that they had to come back from a 17-point deficit. I did not expect that. And as you know, I'm checking the game as I watched the game this morning. Was able to check it on my phone last night. I couldn't believe that saw 39-22. I thought something was wrong with my cell phone when I was checking the score. Not watching the game live, and then watching it again. I DVR'd it, watched it this morning. Because I pretty much I thought that what would happen last night would happen as far as Golden State blitzing Houston for the most part. The worst thing about that game from a Houston standpoint is, number one, the fact that you were up 17 points. But the second part is the fact that you still, even in a blowout, your main guys, Harden, Ariza, those guys still had to go hard in that game. Like they were not able to get a sustainable amount of rest, considering that was a 115-86, trouncing at the hands of Golden State. So as far as I'm concerned, Houston lost twice in that game, not resting their main players, and also with the fact that they blew a 17-point lead in the first quarter, 10-point lead at the half. We're gonna look back on this and with the Chris Paul injury, because I really thought Houston had Golden State on the ropes in this series. They were the tougher team mentally, physically. They were knocking Golden State around, beating them up. The formula was out there in terms of, and I've said this year in and year out, If you want to compete, if you want to beat Golden State, have any chance against Golden State, it comes down to a game of physicality. You have to defend like you just gotta defend like like your shorts are on fire. Okay, against Golden State, you have to get it. And Houston was doing that. Houston was winning this series with their defense up until Game 6. Those they won games 4 and 5 with their defense. And we're gonna look back at the Chris Paul injury, and it's gonna be one of those. I think one of those things that we look back at as a point in NBA history as something that could have been what could have been in the history of the NBA. I really do, because I feel like a healthy Chris Paul doesn't get injured. I think Houston probably wins this series. Now I'm not going to say it with confidence, but there's part of me that believes that Houston, and this is due to Mike D'Antoni only playing 7 players. Part of me does believe that Houston is wearing down as the series moves along, and that when we look back on it, one of the coaching flaws and one of the coaching things that we're gonna look back on is the fact that Mike D'Antoni only played 7 guys, and that just was not enough against a Golden State onslaught, against a team, especially in a game, against a 7-game series, especially if the games are going to be as physical as they are. These have been physical games. Like if you're going to play that style, and which again a style that I think is absolutely necessary to deal with Golden State. They don't like physicality at all. They never have. Whether it's against Memphis, whether it was against Cleveland in 2016, they don't, or even Oklahoma City with the offensive rebound and Steven Adams, Ibaka, the length, how Russell Westbrook can come at you physically. They don't like Golden State. Golden State is a bully team. And there's a reason why Golden State was struggling in these close games, because they are used to blowing people out. They can't. They're not used to executing down the stretch in a fourth quarter. They are used to that. Golden State wants to destroy you and just take your will. They don't want to play a execution tit for tat fourth quarter, 48-minute type game. That's not how they've been built. They have been built to overwhelm you with their talent, especially after the Kevin Durant signing in 2016. So if I'm Houston, if you're Houston, you're gonna look back at this Chris Paul injury as being something that, if he's probably healthy, Houston goes on and possibly wins the championship, or maybe even Cleveland could win the championship against a banged up Houston team with Chris Paul not knowing how that hamstring is going to be. Now Golden State is going to win their second straight championship, their third in 4 years. I just don't. I just can't see Golden State losing Game 7 without Chris Paul, or even with Chris Paul at 40-50%. And where does that leave Houston in the future? Where does that leave Chris Paul in terms of wanting to get his money in the future? I mean, this is an injury that is really going to set a lot of things in motion as far as these two franchises. There was talk about, if Golden State were to lose this series, that's a possibility of this core being broken up. Of maybe them trading either Klay Thompson or Draymond Green. More than likely Klay Thompson, because he has more value. But again, hard pressed to see how Houston is going to win that game without Chris Paul. Chris Paul had by far been their best player in this series. His leadership, his toughness. 347-215-6180 is your call number on this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast. We'll be right back. 20 minutes, 19 minutes after the 4 o'clock hour, on this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast. Nationals up 5-2, bottom of the ninth inning against Miami as they look to take that series. Nats playing relatively well. A very strange just to step away from the basketball for a second, a very strange baseball season to say the least. When you look at these standings, you have three divisions where four teams have winning records. Now I think everybody thought Boston, the Yankees, Houston would all be good, and they all have been. I don't think there's a surprise. That's not surprising to anyone. But Seattle, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, some of these teams, as the Nats take the third game against Miami 5-2. So Nats gonna take that game 5-2 as they just completed it. But you have three divisions where you have four more teams with winning records. The biggest lead right now in baseball is held by the Milwaukee Brewers. Go figure that. Not the Cleveland Indians, not the Houston Astros, not the New York Yankees or Boston, of course, who are of course in the same division. The Milwaukee Brewers. So it has been a very strange baseball season. The NL East, you have four teams with a winning record. The NL Central, you have four teams with a winning record. And the last one, I think, is the AL West, where you have Seattle, where you have Houston, Seattle, the Anaheim, and who's the last team? I want to say, I don't think it's not Texas. It is Oakland. Yeah, Oakland. So, again, I don't know if it's a sign of parity in baseball, because I think we all feel that the Yankees, Houston, and Boston are clearly, and Cleveland, once they get this stuff together, are clearly the four best teams in the American League, and probably four of the five best in all of baseball. The power right now, the power is in the American League. I don't know if there's a National League team that I don't outside of the Nationals. I don't know if there's a National League team that's even capable of winning a championship outside the Nationals. The Dodgers are in the tank right now. I don't, do you trust Milwaukee? Do you trust Pittsburgh? Atlanta, Philadelphia improved, but really not ready to win yet. So all the power is in the American League. That Yankee Red Sox race is going to be a tremendous race, moving down the stretch in the summertime. But again, a lot of I don't think a lot of solid teams, not that many bad teams in baseball, which is always a good thing. And there are going to be a lot of races, not just wild card. It seems like all the divisional races are going to be right there, um, right there. Even heading into as we head into June, as we pass the first real quarter pole of the baseball season. 347-215-6180. Now, I've said this number about 10,000 times. 347-215-6180. I should memorize the number over after 10 years of doing this podcast. Is your call number on this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast. Of course, Game 7 tonight, Boston, Cleveland. LeBron looking to add another chapter to what has been of course, a legendary and historic career. Again, he could go out there and play great, and they could still lose. I think the one thing about this series that has kind of surprised me is how well Boston has played over the course of this season, of the playoffs, and of this even in this series. I did not expect them to win Game 5. I really didn't. Did not expect them to win Game 5. I thought Cleveland, after tying the series, would go out there and steal Game 5 and wrap it up in Game 6. Boston, up until this point, has really, in some ways, outplayed Cleveland. Boston has been, was more competitive against Cleveland in Cleveland than Cleveland has been in Boston. But again, Game 7 is always a different animal. It's a different type of pressure. There's playoff pressure, then there's Game 7 pressure. Outside of Al Horford, not many of the Boston players, whether it's Tatum, Jaylen Brown, have been in a Game 7. Terry Rozier, guys like that have been in a Game 7. So even Marcus Smart, I don't think Marcus Smart have been in a game seven of this magnitude. I know they had the game seven against Milwaukee. That was in the first round against Milwaukee. But in terms of taking it, in terms of being 48 minutes away from a NBA Finals appearance, which, again, if the Boston Celtics get to the NBA Finals, it's going to be one of the great coaching jobs in the history of the NBA to get to the NBA Finals without your best player in Kyrie Irving and either your second or probably your third best player and the All Star player in Gordon Hayward. I mean, that is, again, no one remotely expected Boston to be in this position to where they're one game away from an NBA Finals appearance. And frankly, and I've said this, I'll continue to say this. I'd much rather see Boston against Golden State than Cleveland. With all due respect to Houston, that's because I believe I believe Golden State's going to take Houston out in Game Seven tomorrow. But I'd much rather see Boston versus Golden State than Cleveland. I don't want to see Golden State Cleveland again. I just flat out don't want to see Golden State and Cleveland in the finals again. To be honest with you, Cleveland Houston, eh, it'd be competitive. I actually think Cleveland will have a shot if Houston finds a way to get past Golden State. I actually think with Chris Paul his hamstring, that might be Cleveland's. That might be LeBron's. One of his last shots to get another championship. Golden State going down to Houston in the finals. Golden State going down to Houston in the West tomorrow. But first things first, Cleveland's going to have its hands full with a Boston team that's played beyond their years, a Boston team that we know how well coached they are, a Boston team that has been undefeated at home, a franchise that has never lost a playoff series down when they've been up 2 games to nothing. Not ever. They've been up. I think they've been up 37 times, up 2 games to nothing, and have won every one of those series. But again, they are facing a guy who is a living legend right now, a guy who just has. I've never seen an athlete, let alone basketball player, with this amount of energy and endurance this late in their careers. In terms of LeBron James, again, but I would be concerned about his energy second half of this game. Watch for LeBron James in the third and fourth quarter. It's gonna be very interesting to see how Ty Lue utilizes rest him, how he gets him. Is he going to get him in between quarters? Is he going to obviously the score is going to dictate how much LeBron rests. I think it's very important for Cleveland to get off to a fast start. We've seen in home games, especially in Game Sevens, that the home team could get down 8 to 10 points, can come back. But if you're a road team, you get down double digits. Those games turn into blowouts in the Game Seven. We've seen them turn to avalanche games. It becomes like an avalanche. So I think it's very important for Cleveland to get off to a quick start, kind of negate the crowd a little bit, allow Ty Lue to rest LeBron. At
90
least,
seconds.
I would want LeBron to play, if I'm Cleveland, 38 to 43 minutes. I think once you start getting into that 44, 45, 46 minute range, I think that is the danger zone for LeBron James over 44, over 45 minutes. I wouldn't now again if you had to play him 47, 48 minutes, then you gotta do what you gotta do. But I would definitely be watching for LeBron's endurance in the
60 seconds.
second half of this game. I think Boston did a tremendous job, like I mentioned earlier in the program, with holding LeBron to holding LeBron to with holding LeBron with forcing LeBron to play 48 minutes, to play 46 minutes, and not getting blown out to where he could have been rested in the fourth quarter. I like the Celtics in a close game. I think this will be a highly competitive game. I'm just not trusting of those other guys outside of LeBron. I think Tristan Thompson will play a nice game, but those other
10
guys, whether it's
seconds.
Jeff Green, Clarkson, Dance Jr., I don't trust those guys in a game seven. I just don't. That's going to wrap it up for this latest edition of the Real Deal Podcast. I will see you next time. Later.